Okay, I will take over this webinar. Good afternoon, everyone, and good to see you in our webinar. Especially, we have a guest lecture from German. Hello, Dr. Gänshirt. Okay, I'm very happy you can share your book in this webinar. I think we met in LinkedIn for 2 weeks, yeah, or
Yes.
yes, and that is first time we meet and we talk about your book, and you want to share to our students in Indonesia. I'm very honored to invite you in here, and and we have a lot student for in the Sumatra Institute of Technology. Purpose my name is David Ricardo, and for all audience, I'm lecturer at Department Architecture from Sumatra Institute of Technology, Lampung City. Maybe you don't know where is Lampung. Lampung is part of the Sumatra Island in Indonesia. It's very big island, I think, in Indonesia, and then we have maybe 5,000 or something to our student, and for we begun the institute for 2016. That is very young university in Indonesia, but we have a big plan for our program in university, like as architecture program. And before this third session, we had invited two guest lecture from the Greece, and then the second is from the USA. And Dr. Gänshirt is third guest lecturer for international guest lecture in our program. Our program is very young, for very young program. And before we start for your slide, I want to invite Mr. Eko Purwono. He is head of Department of Architecture in ITERA, or Sumatra Institute of Technology. I think we have Pak Eko in here untuk kata sambutannya, Pak Eko.
Okay.
Untuk waktu dan tempat saya persilahkan.
Okay, thank you, David. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, Mr. Gänshirt.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, it's morning in Germany. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's afternoon. It's 4 o'clock in West Indonesian time. Yeah. Welcome to the club. Thank you for your plan to share your books, your new books on architecture designs. I think it's very interesting that very rarely we read books on architecture design methods. Mostly the books written on the result of the design, and you read about the method. So we would like to thank you for this opportunity to share your new books. Yeah? Okay. Okay, please, Pak David, to start the meeting and let Dr. Gänshirt to start the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Eko Purwono. And the second one, I want to invite the Mr. Budi Trianto, IAI, for the speech in the decision. Time is yours, Mr. Budi. Pak Budi.
Do you hear my voice?
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, David.
Yep.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening
Waalaikumsalam.
for everyone, and also to Christian. I'm sorry if I don't pronounce your name correctly. It
Oh, it's
is it is a pleasure for us to meet you. Thanks for sharing your time here. We are very motivated to hear what will you tell to us. I think the book will be very interesting. So we need to hear from you. The book name is Tools for Ideas: Introduction to Architectural Design. I think it is one of the most important thing for architect. And for your information, the audience are professional and also students. So it is a pleasure for us to hear from you. And from our institution, for your information, I'm the chairman of International Architect Board of Indonesia, IAI. Yeah, we are very pleased to cooperate with ITERA, one of the universities in Lampung. We have, for your information, we have 3 universities here in Lampung with the architecture studies inside. So I think your presentation will be very benefit for us. Thanks for us, from me, and I think time will be yours. And for all the participation, hopefully this evening will give all of us more education. Thank you. Good evening. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Okay, untuk for the next, I think Rehan is back. Time is yours, Rehan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon for all the participants. Hope that you all being healthy and good there. Terima kasih Bapak-Bapak sekalian dan saudara-saudara sekalian telah hadir pada acara hari ini. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Raihan, and I will be hosting you for today's event. Do you guys know what kind of event today? So our event today is about to preview a book, Tools for Ideas: Introduction to Architectural Design by Dr. Gänshirt. This preview will be delivered by the speaker for today, Mr. Dr. Gänshirt. And next, now I would like to introduce our moderator for today, Mr. David Ricardo, STMT. Can you share in the CV, please? Okay. This is the curriculum vitae for Mr. David. His full name is Mr. David Ricardo, STMT. He's an Indonesian. He is a lecturer in Sumatra Institute of Technology, Indonesia. His focus is about digital architecture, fully familiar with simulation program for sustainable design, such as CFD, Ecotech, Dialux, etc. have a lot of experience of applying concept in the everything project, active for design, competition, and active for research of architecture design. As you can see, he got some plenty career history from February 2015 to September, a lecture assistant at Atmajaya University Yogyakarta, architectural lecturer of Panchabudi Development University, architecture lecturer of Sumatra Institute of Technology since March 2019, and then head of master plan physics of Sumatra Institute of Technology, Lampung, Indonesia. And next. July 2021 from now, founder, Jadi architect based in Lampung and Yogyakarta. So his academic qualification is at Atmajaya University of Yogyakarta, Master of Engineering, Magister Teknik Arsitektur 2015-2017, Palangkaraya University of Central Borneo, Architecture degree 2003 to 2010. His organization experience, member of Institute of Indonesian Architect, IAI, since 27 to now, member of Inspire Lijurai, of International Student Competition from 2020, member of Association of Built Environment Researcher from 2020. Research experience, Riyakudu Corridor Road, arrangement design study with identification of Lampung cultural values as a architecture of archipelago. List of publication. Entitled The Effect of Peat Soil on Room Temperature in Type 36 housing in Palangkaraya, which is in Borneo. Utilization road markings to set limits of the territorial behavior in the Sunday morning market Gajah Mada University of Yogyakarta. Identify development strategy area riverbanks Kameloh Baru base culture Dayak community. Design area riverbank Leto Timoho village with emphasis on the idea is participatory. Evaluation arrangement for furniture ergonomic pattern based user activity room. Case study is adult reading room, library Central Kalimantan. And next, fifth winner of local building architecture, Dayak architecture design. And then participant design in the Intaran House competition Bali 2017. Participant design at Institute of Indonesian Architect competition 2018 for Takengon competition, and last participant in Ministry of Research and Higher Education competition about COVID-19 in 2020. And now we will begin our main agenda for today. The main speaker is Dr. Christian Gänshirt. Also, this will be moderated by Mr. David Ricardo, STMT. Then we would like to invite to the stage our moderator for today, to the Honorable Mr. David Ricardo, STMT. Mr. David, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Rehan. I think I was introduced myself purpose session, and for the efficiently time, I think we can start immediately for Dr. Christian Gänshirt to share book. Yeah, we can hear from Dr. Christian what is topic of the book, and then what is the title, and then the preview about his book. For Dr. Christian Gänshirt, I think time is yours. Please.
Hello. Can you see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So thank you very much, David, and everyone for for inviting me to present my new book. I'm very excited. It's my first talk in Indonesia, so I'm happy I can do that without any traveling. I'm talking from Berlin today. Here it's a cold winter morning. We had like -1 degree this morning, sun is shining. And I will start soon showing you my lecture slides. Here, this is the book I'm talking about. It's called Tools for Ideas, Introduction to Architectural Design. It's a new edition of a book that already existed for a couple of years. And I hope to explain you, in the first part of my talk, I want to explain you like what are the main core ideas of the book. And in the second part, I will explain you what's new in the new edition, because it's much larger than the previous editions of the book. So let me start by screen sharing. You can see what I show. I need to share the screen now. This is the screen. Share. And I start by playing. Play. Does it? Oh, it's slow. Wait a second. Okay, now you see the book cover?
Yes, we see.
It's you can see it, right? Yes. So the title is Tools for Ideas, and the intention of the book is to provide an introduction to architectural design. This is quite an interesting thing if you look at architecture schools around the globe, that architecture is mainly taught as a practice, and there's very little teaching and instruction about the background of this activity. So what kind of activity is it actually? So what's the methodology? What are the tools we can use? How should we use these tools? So there's like this gap in architectural education. I felt very much as a student. So I was trying to learn how to do architectural design. Nobody explained me, but I had to do all these tasks. And then when I started teaching myself about 20 years ago, I was wondering, how could I better explain what we are doing when we do architectural design? So like the first idea that came to my mind is maybe I can explain the tools we use to do architectural design. And you see, so this hand on the book cover, it's actually from a photo taken. Is it going? It's from this photo. It's a photo taken by a Russian architect in Germany. Gänshirt. And he used this photograph to illustrate the connection between. There's another voice. Maybe someone needs to turn the microphone.
Yes.
So he used this photograph with a hand and a compass, which is almost like the symbol of the to combine it with his own portrait. So he called that self-portrait as a constructor. And for many years, this photograph was like an inspiration for my research, because it tells so much about the activity of design in just one image. So we have our hands we use to do something, and in the same time, our eyes come out of our hands, so they go through our hands. And behind all of that is our head and our brain, where we think, where we create our ideas. And we need tools and all sorts of words and techniques to put these tools out. So when I'm talking about, this is very slow today. When I'm talking about design tools, I'm actually using a metaphor for a broad set of activities and media. Because the tricky thing about architectural design is that we have just this little word to talk about it, but in fact, it can mean so many different activities. So it's like calling this design tools. Yeah, there's no scientific definition of this term, so it's like a broad, all-encompassing way of talking about architectural practice. We all go with the hope that we could use a toolbox that's neatly ordered and well organized, like this box of drafting tools made about 100 years ago in Germany, in Munich. And then when we look at the practice of architecture, what we see, for example, in an exhibition on architecture by Renzo Piano is a broad set of things, very different things. We see chairs and tables and models on the tables and drawings and sketches on the tables, but we also see big mock-ups and photographs hanging in the air, and we see texts on the wall and videos going on, and even books and magazines. So what do all these strange elements contribute to our practice of design? That was my research question. And in the new book, or the new edition of the book, I added a very comprehensive new introduction to the book to make it more accessible. So it will answer you all many questions, like where the book does come from, how it was conceived, and also like it's almost like a manifesto, because also I like ask questions how we can improve design and design teaching. The first important part of the book is about fundamentals. This is about research and methodology. So how we can talk about design. And it's very important for everyone who is trying to do architectural design to understand that this activity is quite demanding. It's actually one of the most demanding human activities, because it lies at the heart of all professions that derive from the architecton of Greek antiquity. Architects, urban designers, landscape architects, as well as industrial designers, set designers, and engineers of all kinds do design. And design connects actually two very different spheres, practice and theory, and requires both artistic skills and also a solid scientific grounding. Its goal is to meet a need that has both philosophical and political aspects, the good design of the world we live in. It's important to understand how important design has become, because today we mostly live in designed environments. So the buildings we are in, the cities we are in, the universities, our tables, our computers, everything is designed. And if it's well designed, it's a good place to be and it's a good life. And if it's not well designed, it creates problems. So we need to understand very well how design can be done. It's about, no, wait, sorry, I need to go back, but it doesn't go back. No. Wait, my computer is very slow today. So it was only in the second half of the 20th century, about 70 years ago, that it became common knowledge that design can and must be understood as a process that can be traced from beginning with the definition of a task or a design problem, then starting with an abstract like target construct, then going to a more concrete system of design with all sorts of steps to be followed, all sorts of people interacting with the design process, and then going to work planning and implementation of the design process. And in architecture, this has become quite a complex process, taking several years, sometimes with many people involved, like users, clients, authorities, architects, engineers, building contractors, many questions to be resolved, like statics, fire protection, heating, ventilation, electricity. So, and somehow many architects feel that we are hitting a wall because design has become so complex that it's difficult to do. So we hope to have it organized in a very nice process. And it's important to understand that is like an idea of design. But in reality, this process often is not that nice. So it's often more complicated. And this is some architects and urban designers, they try to depict their process and it looked more like not so clear, very confusing, many events. It's going in parallel, jumping up and down. So this idealized image of the process maybe is maybe not the right way to completely understand it. And one of the most famous designers of our times, Bruce Mau, he says our process actually it's like this. It's very confusing, and we go from one phase to the next, and we go back and forth, and in the end we have some result, but we can do it. So realizing that the understanding of process is not enough to explain a design, I went back to an older understanding of design, which is understanding design as a creative act. So it's someone having an idea and moving forward with his design project. And this creative act is quite mysterious because, in fact, we don't know what happens in our brain. So we are not sure where our ideas come from. They pop up all of a sudden sometimes. And the reason for that is that brain science tells us that 90% of what we are thinking is not conscious to us. So we don't know what our brain is doing, but still it's able to create great ideas, and they come up and we can use them. So we need to be aware that the rational process sometimes is totally interrupted by these ideas that pop up in our brains. There are many different attempts of defining design by saying like design is thinking, or design is drawing, or design is sketching, or design is judging or deciding. And I was trying to look at these definitions and understanding how they connect, because in fact, there's a set of activities we always have to undertake to do design. We have to think about something, and very often we don't know how we do that. And then we have to express our ideas somehow. So we have to find ways to put our ideas out of our brain into something else. And to do this, we need all sorts of tools. So we need visual tools and verbal tools. That's the two categories I was originally talking about. And when we put our ideas out, like, for example, in a sketch or in a drawing or in a gesture, or even by talking, we can talk about ideas, we perceive them again. So we see what we do and we think about it again. And I would call this like the second design cycle, which is a critical cycle. So we criticize and critically reflect upon what we have been doing, and we start the next cycle of expressing an improved idea or a changed idea. And this is a very important, like, secret key to all design activities, because all design activities always follow that cycle. So if you are lost, if you don't know what to do next, you can go back to this understanding, where am I in my design cycle? And what would be the next thing to do? Should I change my thinking? Should I choose a different expression? Should I use different tools to do that? Do I have to perceive my idea in a different way, look at it from a different angle, thinking it again? So this is what I would call like the secret key, because this cycle or these activities are always present in any design process, and each step is building on the next step. So you only can express what you thought, you only can perceive what your tools tell you, and you only can think about what you have seen. So none of these steps can be skipped in a way. No? If you want to make improvements, you have to go step by step, again and again and again and again. So that's maybe like the secret of design. And the key term in this cycle is tools. So my research question is, what is a design tool? And for a long time, when I started asking this question, I was not aware what a fundamental change it brought to design research and to design thinking. Because previously, most design research was about methodology. So trying to describe design methods that could be followed to produce good results. It was the like design method movement created in the UK in the 1960s, 70s, which became a big thing. And it tried to base design more on scientific ways of approaching activities. when looking at the design tool, it's a totally different angle. It's more looking into the media that are available. It's more looking from a cultural perspective. And it's a much more open-ended question because you can use tools in so many different ways. So the question I'm asking is, how do design tools work? What are they good for? And what are they not so good for? If we look at the table of an architect about 50 years ago, most architects' tables looked somehow like that. Some of you might still know famous Finnish architect Alvar Aalto, who has always been a big influence on my work and my thinking. This is a work table in his private office in his private home in Helsinki. So what's on the table? There's a pencil, there are some rulers, there's a triangle and another triangle and some little tools here. There are some curved shapes, and there is drawings on the board. There's also a brush to clean the drawings. There's a telephone to talk, and all is well illuminated by a lamp. So, and when I started my research, I didn't think this was so special because most architects' tables do look like this, or did look like this at the time. My own table looked like this. My table in the office of Alvaro Siza, where I started my career, looked the same. The same tools were there. This is the table of Le Corbusier. It looked the same. So I thought, all architects have the same tools. How come they produce so different results? And in fact, for the beginning of my research, I took one step back. So this is the table I was showing you before. I took one step back in Aalto's office to look, what did he produce on this table? So we see he made some models. He famously produced oil sketches, drawings, all sorts of drawings, but also photographs. And if we take another step back, we see the offices composed by desks and many things on the walls and so on. So I started to say, maybe it's more interesting if I study not the triangle and the pencil, but if I study rather the models and the drawings and the photographs and all sorts of media he produces. On the wall in Aalto's office, I found these tools, and some of you might even not even know today what it is. These are T-squares. These are used to draw parallel lines on a table. And the way they are put on the wall, it's almost like celebrating them. To us today, they almost look like farmers' tools. But at the time, this was what the simple thing architects had to produce architecture. So let's go back to the question of design tools, what they are, visual and verbal tools. When I came up with this division saying there are two groups of tools, this was actually based on an understanding of the human brain. So the brain research of the 1970s found out that the two halves of our brains roughly work in different ways. This research is actually outdated. Nowadays, we have much more intricate knowledge about our brains, but still there is this understanding there are two opposite ways of thinking. One we would call visual thinking, which is more emotional, more spatial, more analogous. The other one we would call verbal thinking, which is more logical, rational, based on time, and also based on digital understanding of the world. So I also did this kind of research because actually I am left-handed. So I prefer to use this hand for writing, and maybe my brain works a little differently. So my question was very systematically, what are the visual design tools? Can we come up with a list that orders these tools in a sequence that goes from the simple to the more complex tools? So I started with a gesture. It's very easy to use. Then a sketch is like a gesture on paper. Then we have scale drawings. We compose models by using different types of scale drawings together. If we depict a model, we get a perspective view. If we do this mechanically, we get a photograph. And if we combine photos, we get a film. And if we do this digitally, we get a video. So the idea of this list is that the simple tools are always the basis for the next level of complexity of tools. And we can say there's a similar list for the verbal tools. Actually, many architects are not aware that how important verbal tools are for their work. They talk all the time, but they think the main tool should be drawing and model making. But in fact, it's also important to talk about what we are doing, to describe it so somebody can understand the ideas. It's also important to criticize in order to improve and to have a discussion, for example, with a client or with colleagues to find out how to move forward with an idea. If the discussion is successful, it might result in a theory. And the theory, again, is the basis for an algorithm, and algorithms are what make programs. So the verbal tools, they go from a very simple term we use, from sentence all the way to computer programs. And something that's important today to understand is that the visual tools are not very good for designing sustainability. So they don't help us very much to understand the sustainable aspects of a project. So we need verbal tools and emphasize on verbal tools to be able to do that. Obviously, the most important tool for many of us today is the computer. And it has become so powerful because it's based on both visual and verbal elements. So the chip actually is a line drawing produced by photography, the chip in the computer, and the programs that run on the chip, they are made by words. So it's like a computer, because it combines visual and verbal tools on the highest level, it's capable of doing very powerful things. I spent a couple of years in China, and one lesson I learned from that is that the relation between dualities can be understood in a different way. In the Western understanding, we see dualities as opposites. We see visual against the verbal, and we create a big divide between that. And even professions tend to do one or the other. In the traditional Chinese understanding, dualities can be treated like yin and yang. So they can be connected and they can complement each other, and they also can contain each other. And I think that's the way we should think about design tools as well. So we should use visual and verbal tools in a complementary way and not using one or the other, but rather use both together. So the main body of my book is about tools. And I'm showing you this photograph to show you that I'm talking about a real book. So you don't need a password to open it. It can be there all the time. It cannot disappear from your hard drive, and promise the battery life is endless. If you can use it for hundreds and thousands of hours, it will never run out of battery. So the tools, I'm describing these tools in my book, like each one in a chapter, and I cannot do this in my lecture today. I will just give you the basic ideas of each chapter so you can see where this is going to. Because each chapter would be a lecture, a complete lecture in its own. So it's about 15 hours I would have to talk to explain you everything that's in the book. I cannot do that today. But I'm starting with gesture as a design tool, because gestures are so humane and they are so close to our body, and it's very easy and simple for us to use them. So, and it's amazing if you observe, if you look what's possible to do just with hands, what kind of forms you can create, what can happen between them, what kind of spaces, how you can look at these things. So please, if you don't know what to do, just start just using your hands to study. one of the big questions in my book is the question of digital turn in design, because that's what we have been experiencing over the last 2 decades, that design activities became more and more digital. And what I'm showing here as an example is a Swedish design team that uses gestures in the air. They make gestures in the air, recorded by cameras and combined by computers into a spatial object to produce their design. So these gestures, they are recorded and then they print them in digital printing, and that's like the chair they get from these gestures. And they produce a whole series of furniture and lamps and the tables. I'm not sure how comfortable it is, but they sell it on their website. So that's how far you can go when you combine digital technologies and gestures. So that's a big space to be explored. And some of you might have seen this gesture of a little lady in Sweden. As architects, we often think gestures are not very powerful, but when you do it then in the right moment and in the right place, and they are maybe reported, they can be super powerful. So many of you might have seen Greta Thunberg, and please be aware that her gesture actually was a very architectural gesture, because the little girl sitting, making a statement about climate change, almost a global movement. And that's the true power of gestures today, because if we publish them on social media, they can travel. And no one is too small to do that. No. So this is another page of my book. So gestures, they are like sketches in the air, and this translates to the next chapter, which is about sketches. Some architects think it's like the most important thing for them to do, and I will explain you very quickly why this is the case. Sketches are almost the most immediate way to fix an expression somewhere on paper. And it's not important that they look beautiful. So this is the Corbusier sketching. He doesn't care about the beauty of the sketch. It's about developing a thought, putting out there, and then revising and improving it. And the power of gestures is that in a few minutes you can do so many things. That's a sketch Alvaro Siza did when I was working with him. This is a factory building. He didn't like the design so much, so he quickly did another design of it, changing the corner, basically. At the same time, he looked at the interior space, putting a figure there to see the scale. He looked at the building connecting to the next factory building. He looked into some details, and all of this in a couple of minutes, trying to explain what he thought and explaining to himself what he was thinking and how he could improve the design. So that's why it's so precious. It's so close to ourselves, no? Close and quick and effective. Unfortunately, many architecture schools don't even talk about gestures. So you only look at renderings and finished drawings, but for the design process, sketches and gestures are very important. So it's important to think about them, to train them, and not to be afraid to make ugly ones. That's another design tool architects often don't think too much about, language. But be aware that only architects and professionals understand drawings. So if you draw something, it needs for other people, it needs to be explained. So your clients might not understand your drawings. They might even not understand your models. You will have to explain it to them. And there's a lot of research that shows that only those architects are really successful who are able to really communicate well with their clients and with their engineers. And again, be aware that the combination of words and gestures can be a very powerful event. Like Amanda Gorman, just speaking 5 minutes and doing very beautiful gestures, she became famous in an instant. Drawing, in many architecture schools, and at least in my education, it was like the core tool. We almost didn't do anything else. And we did it in very tedious ways. So at the time, it was done by ink. This is a former student of mine, about almost 20 years ago now. ink, using ink pens, and it was terrible because correcting any mistake took ages. So nowadays, we use mostly digital ways of producing drawings. But what we have to understand is that digital drawings are not the same at all. So they are not drawings, they are databases. And the way we deal with them is totally different, and we need to think about it to be good at it. So that's, again, the digital turn in design practice is quite a challenge because it asks us to rethink what we are doing and to better understand what we are doing. Some architects use models very much, and I absolutely endorse that because models have a quality that no other design tool has, because they bring us closer to the building, the real building. It's the tool that brings us closest to reality. So we can study materials in the models, we can study space, we can study construction. And it's very important to understand that a physical model is not at all the same as a digital model, because the way we look at it, the way we can handle it is totally different. So don't think you can skip the physical model. Rather, be careful to use it, and be rather also careful to analyze it. So what is the original you want to depict, and which are the attributes you can depict? How will those be represented in the model, and what other abundant attributes would come with these attributes? So analyzing models is quite, in a scientific way, is quite challenging, and you need to think about that, and you need to learn that in order to be find a good ways to use models as a design tools. So obviously nowadays everyone is using computers, and that's, in a way, it was a liberation, but also it has become a challenge because computers are so powerful today that the power balance between tool and architect has changed. So these tools are often more powerful than we are, and the question is open if they are using us or we are using them. So it's very obvious. A pen, if I use a pen, it's me using the pen. If I use a computer, it's rather the computer telling me what I can do. So, and that's quite sometimes limits our work, limits our thinking, and we need to be aware of that and sometimes step out of this, rather do some sketches to liberate ourselves from the pressure the computer puts on us. A design tool that's not very popular with architects often is calculation, because they think it's against creativity. But actually it's very important because it helps you to understand the consequences of your project. It helps you to see the cost of it. It helps you to evaluate it. It helps you to understand the sustainability, the economy of it. And again, this tool has improved so much through the digital turn. So let me show you a calculation machine I saw in the office of Father Alto. And this is I was struck by it because I thought, okay, that's what he was using. Alvar Aalto, the world-famous architect, that's what he had for calculations. He had no computers, he had not even calculators. So, and I was very happy some days ago, some weeks ago, I found a machine like this on the flea market here in Berlin. I want to show it to you. That's how it looks. Now that's Aalto's calculation machine. That's what he used to make his projects. And it's quite heavy. It's 6.5 kilograms. And you calculate by going like this. So when you go forward, you add. When you go backward, you subtract. That's how you can do your calculations. And that's what architects have. Amazing. Today, it's so easy for us to come up with an Excel sheet and make progress. But at the time, that's what they had. One of the most important tools, again, is critique, is the question which criteria we use to evaluate what we do. So it's easy to produce a lot of stuff. Ideas come up every night, every morning, we do more. But what is really good? What is good enough? What is a little bit better? How can we decide that? So it's very important when you want to learn design you have to think a lot about the criteria you want to apply for design. There's this traditional list of criteria given by Vitruvius, which is firmitas, utilitas, venustas, which means solidity, the usefulness of a building and the beauty of a building. But there are other criteria that have impact on architecture. So you need to think about that. You need to discuss those with your teachers, with your students, with your clients. What are the criteria we want to use to do architecture? For many students, this moment of the crit, when they present their project and they are criticized by their teachers, it's a frightening moment. And I love this painting, very old painting. It's about 400 years old, that shows that this situation had even the most famous architects had to go through this situation. So this is Michelangelo. He was the architect of the Pope, and this is the Pope who is criticizing his architecture. And look at the fearful expression in his face. He's worried about what his critic is going to say. But nowadays, and you will be worried, or we are worried when we are in this situation, but it's a key situation in architecture. And nowadays, everybody remembers the artist, but the Pope is forgotten. So be aware, you are actually the more powerful person, even if it doesn't look like. So this is a diagram by Charles Eames, trying to understand the different criteria he is using and them and how they combine and how they overlap. So please keep thinking about those, because new criteria will come up and they will inspire also your work and they will guide your work. And it's, for example, it's a very different question in which climate you work, in which culture you work, and many questions come up. So these are the tools. This is like what I call the main body of my book. There are a couple of more. I have not the time to explain them today. And this was my book. This is the content or the core of my book in the 2007 edition. So it's already quite old. It was quite a success. It had a second edition, German edition in 2011. It was translated to Chinese. And for a couple of years, my editor was asking me to do a revised and expanded edition. So, but I had no time to do it because I helped starting an architecture school in China. So I helped building an architecture program there. And it definitely didn't leave much time for writing. But now I had some time. I came back to Berlin. And this is the new edition. And now in the second half of my talk, I want to explain what's new about that. No? So maybe the most important change is the question of sustainability. It's only a few pages in the book, but it changes everything, because when we use these criteria, we understand that the traditional design tools like drawings and model making and sketching very often are not very helpful to understand the sustainability of a project. So we need to develop new tools to be able to do sustainable projects. Again, sustainability is a very simple word to use. Everyone can claim sustainability, but it's very difficult to prove. So because it needs three value sets or value systems to do that. First of all, it's a system of ecology. So only if a project is ecologically well designed, it can be sustainable. It also needs to be economically well designed. So the economy of the project will work, and we definitely need a lot of numbers to prove that. And then it also needs to be socially sustainable. So only if it's socially, ecologically and economically sustainable, we can talk about sustainability. And it's a long list of criteria you have to check and you have to think about to be able to prove that. How can we do that? That's the main question for the new edition. So here is the table of contents. These are the tools I'm talking about. So in the new part is especially part C, where I'm talking about practice and about the question, can we develop design practices and understand design practices that help us to do more sustainable architecture. And also the question of practice is, how do we use these tools? How do we combine these tools together to create a specific design attitude and a specific design practice? Before I go so deep into practice, I needed another chapter on theory as a design tool. Because the theory actually is the basis of architecture. Our understanding of architecture needs theory to understand what architecture is. So without theory, we cannot understand it. We cannot understand what architecture is without understanding the discourse and the discussion that has developed over centuries that allows us today to decide what architecture is. So this question, is this architecture when we look at a piece of paper like that? And if you put a little human figure there, we understand it as a model. Is this architecture? We need architecture theory, and we need architectural knowledge to be able to decide that. It's an open question. The other most important part of the new edition of the book is referencing all the research that has been done on design tools since the first edition was published. The 2007 edition of the book was actually the first book internationally on design tools, studying design tools. And a lot of researchers, I was surprised how many did that. A lot of researchers took up the question and started their own research on design tools. And some of them creating PhD dissertations, getting exhibitions, conferences, excellent monographs, and some of them you see here. So for example, The Working Drawing, The Architect's Tool is a big book produced by the ETH in Zurich. Others produced wonderful books on models as design tools, or a book about Frei Otto, Thinking by Modeling. So there's about 25 books have been published on design tools now. So there's much more to know, much more research has been done, and that, of course, that had to feed into the new edition of my book. Quite soon after the publication of the first edition, a big exhibition was set up in Vienna, in the Architecture Center in Vienna, on design tools. These researchers, they went into architects' offices to see what they do, what they use, how they work. And they put this all together in a beautiful exhibition, beautifully lit, beautifully exposed. For example, they went to visit Stephen Hall Architects to see the photos they use, describing their process, describing the media and the sketches and the models they use. And they made some amazing discoveries. So this is Atelier Bauau. They use lots of models, and but also videos and photography. These are more traditional, like drafting tools, beautiful set of drafting tools. It's historic. Nobody does do it like this anymore. But interesting to see. This is a plotter of that period. But then they made amazing discoveries as well. So architects in Hong Kong, they use Lego toys to play with, but also to create their models with. And architects in Switzerland, their response to the question of what is your most important design tool, their response was, it's our bed. Because we go to bed, we sleep, we dream, and we wake up and we have new ideas. So we don't know how it happens. We don't know what our brain is doing at night, but it's our most beloved and most interesting tool. And some architects in France, they even use shotguns. I would not recommend to do this in studio, but they use a shotgun to shoot on a clay block. And this clay block then is used as a model for the buildings they want to do. This is a tool maybe only used once, but still it's a way of doing it. So what was amazing to see in this exhibition is the broad range of items architects actually can use to develop their thinking. So we are not limited to pencil and paper. We are not limited to studio. We can think and design and invent by so many different ways. And that's that's an important thing to understand. Design is not only drawing. No, design is maybe shooting, maybe sleeping, maybe playing. There's a beautiful catalog of this exhibition you might find in your library. I'm not sure if it traveled all the way. This exhibition then traveled to different places in Canada even, and there were conferences held. So this is a conference that was held in Austria. This is the researcher, the main researcher of the exhibition. She's a professor in Vienna now. And I was even more surprised when a German university, Bauhaus University in Weimar, started a whole research program, research fellow program, Tools of Design in 2010. Doing a big conference in 2012, they hired like 5 or 6 or 7 researchers for about 2 years to do research on design tools. And they produced a book, which was kind of confusing to me because many of these tools are tools on a very different level of understanding. And I will come back to this later. I was also quite impressed by the research of Patrick Schumacher because it's the first architecture theory that has an emphasis on design process. He talks on many pages of his book, he talks about design process. And I must say I was quite pleased by this response from the Zurich University of the Arts. They produced a toolkit for their students. This is rather like a little bit joking, but it's also a little bit serious, a little bit interesting. So they have 5 tools to use. The first one is a question screw. You would use it for, usually we use it to open wine bottles, but they call it a question screw. Then they have a metal hook called an ideas catcher. You know this tool, they call it concept sharpener. And then this is a bottle opener, they call eye opener, and the hammer of innovation. So for them, the design process starts with an interesting question. Then you catch some ideas, you sharpen them with your concept sharpener. You need an eye opener to really see what you're doing. And in the end, you have the hammer of innovation to make it a great idea. One of my colleagues in China, he's American actually, discovered that Chinese carpenters have a very interesting tool that's something in between craftsman's tool and the drawing. They use a stick, which is called tangang stick. And on 4 sides of this stick, they put the marks for the measurements they will use to construct their structure. So this is very interesting because all the information from the working drawing is projected on a stick, and the stick is like closing the missing gap between craftsman's tools and architect's tools like drawings. And these carpenters insist they don't want to use drawing. The stick is much more precise for them and much more useful. So that's how they use it. Here it is, and then there you go. Other researchers produced doctoral dissertations on concept, a dialogic instrument in architectural design. And this researcher actually also started a junior professorship on tool cultures, doing a lot of research on tools of different types. They also produced a conference called Working and Thinking Tool, on creative processes, on the role of the body in the design, thinking and working, and case studies, very interesting book. Another conference did a lot of research on the combination of, or the role of science in architecture. Because as architects, we often are quite confused about our position in university, and they try to clarify that. I was quite surprised by this research. Henrik Schulz did a PhD dissertation on walking as a research method for landscape architects. Very beautiful research. And Angelika Jäckel did research on the gesture of spaces. So discussing gesture in relation to architectural space and how it helps us to analyze and understand space. That's another author, Joris Hartmann. He did a PhD on recurrence and ambiguity as design tools for architecture. His claim is that design is a purely mental activity, and all tools, design tools, should be mental for that. I wouldn't agree on it, but still, he made an important book on that. So this is the book I was already mentioning, The Walking Drawing, an Architect's Tool. It's quite a big book, quite impressive to look at. And the same counts for this one. The architect's model as a tool, but also a fetish and a small utopia. This was a big exhibition in the German Architecture Museum in Frankfurt a couple of years ago, and the catalog is really so interesting, so beautiful. I'll show you some of the walking drawings from the first book. So that's probably like, it's not what architects publish. No, that's what architects use to really make their buildings happen. And it's quite impressive to see how different they are and how different architects use that tool. So this is a more digital version of that. But it's probably the type of drawing that's closest to the idea of tool. Others did research on metaphors in architecture, how they work as a tools, or on architecture photography and how it's to be used. Diagrams has become a very important research topic in architecture design. And I also found quite an old book that had an impressive design tool index. And I was a little bit confused because I had never heard of it. And the book actually, it doesn't talk about the design tools at all in the text of the book. And the index, if you go through it, it's basically everything. Everything that comes up in a book is considered a design tool. So this question is quite open, what design tools are. And I felt, especially when I looked at this book, at all these different tools they are talking about, like animation, diagrams, experiment, creativity techniques, but also like parallel projections, participation, grid, reconstruction, collecting. I felt a little lost in that, and I felt I had to think again about my taxonomy. So the table I was showing you with visual and verbal tools, obviously it's not complete. It's far from being complete. So I was trying to revise that, and I will show you how I did that. Let me first talk a little more to end this chapter is this book on collecting as a tool for modern architecture. It was a big research undertaken by Eva Maria Froschauer, a colleague of mine in Berlin, and she discovered amazing things. For example, she discovered how architects use collections as a design tool. This is a Swiss architect, landscape architect. His name is Vogt in Zurich, and they very consciously and very, very clearly use collecting as a tool to create a mental space for developing of their ideas. So that's how their collections look like. It's a table with all sorts of books and objects and even stones and vegetation. And then it's a pin wall where they have different spaces for different topics, like these spaces for metaphor that should be used in relation with all sorts of texts and quotes and little objects. Another space on vegetation, on thresholds. So these are the topics they try to identify or to address in their project. And it's amazing how powerful it even looks when you see it, and just looking at a collection like this already is inspiring a lot. So that was a big surprise for me to see how powerful this design tool can be. So now let's go back to my systematic and how I had to revise it. So go back to the design cycle. So understanding now this discussion that had come up over the last 10 years was showing me that actually everything in the design cycle can also be described as a tool. So expression can be a tool, thinking can be a tool, or can be considered as a tool. And as a consequence, so the tools I had as visual and verbal tools, they also are thinking tools because they structure our thinking. And there are many different ways of talking and thinking about them. So there's a whole different way of using these tools in ways of thinking, creative, critical, visual, verbal, theory, and so on. There's also different ways of acting, cultural techniques we do. There are different media or means of perception, means of expression, different artworks. we can consider design tools, like we can consider a painting or a sketch or a drawing a design tool, but there are also physical tools, and there are even like raw materials, and dust and water makes mud, and from mud we make architecture. You know, we make bricks, and the bricks we make clay and so on. So I felt when I saw this image, I cannot do this to my audience. I need to come up with a clearer system, and I translated that into a matrix. So trying to have a more rational way to understand the media we use for design. It's the visual and the verbal ones, but there are also acoustic ones and aesthetic ones, like the body or the building or olfactory and haptic. And there are overlaps, so the gesture is synesthetic but also visual, and the comic strip is visual and verbal, and so on. But all these media can be used in very different ways. So there's the other part of the matrix, putting all these possibilities of tools to use the media. And if we start combining those, we get hundreds of possibilities. So for example, a diagram can be used in terms of ethics or aesthetics or theory or strategy or perception, or it can be used with a computer and so on. So this opens, this like a map of all possibilities of design. And to test my map, I was trying to map the book I was showing. The book I was confused about. I was trying to map all the different chapters of the books in understanding if my map works. And that's like the introduction of the chapter only focuses on visual design tools. Then the next chapter is on animation. It's basically on film and video, but also on buildings. The next chapter is on diagrams, which in different ways. Another chapter on experiment, so it's about research and perception. Another chapter on the human body in relation of design. Then someone else is talking about the model, which is here, but only in certain ways. Someone else talking about drawing the new, someone else talking about notations. Then next author is talking about parallel projections, which is this tool, but also only in specific ways, not in all ways. Participation comes here. Grids, reconstruction, it's about the building. As a tool, collecting, that's the last book I was talking about, but only in certain ways. So, this research led me to a new understanding of the field of design, of the tools that are possible, and you find it in my book as a diagram or a matrix trying to map like conventional tools and less conventional tools. And now we could spend days arguing if this should be gray or yellow, or this should be orange, and how this should be mapped. So in a sense, it's almost too complex to be discussed. Don't worry about that. So the last part of the book is now on practice. And first of all, trying to understand standard practice and trying to see the problems of that. And then I was identifying 3 types of architectural practice that are more promising than traditional standard design practice. And especially in terms of being able to create more sustainable architecture. So first of them certainly is digital design. Everybody is trying to do that nowadays. And it leads to amazing shapes and amazing results. This is a pavilion I saw in Suzhou 2 years ago. But very often the understanding of digital design is quite limited. Many of us only think if we do CAD, if we do architectural drawings, or if we do a 3D model in the computer, we do digital design. Actually, it's only the beginning. So we can present our project digitally, but also we can generate our forms digitally. We can inform our forms by doing building information modeling. We can optimize them. We can produce them in a digital way. We can use even digital construction technologies, Also, the use of the building can be done by digital ways. So some buildings nowadays, they have programs designed to run the building, maintenance, disassembly, reuse of the buildings. So it's a much more comprehensive understanding of what the digital brings to architecture today, and allowing for amazing spaces and amazing results. This is actually quite a simple building. It's just a thin metal skin, but see the shape of it. Wow. It's only by computers we can handle something like that. And just to show you, give you a little idea of what's possible today, this is a 3D printed stainless steel bridge made in Amsterdam 2 years ago. And that's one of the main images they show how to explain the process. So it's a robot that goes line by line, welding all the form, and it's amazing. It's amazingly beautiful, and also amazingly to see that what we can do nowadays. Actually, almost all the materials can be 3D printed now: concrete, glass, metal, even chocolate. Another design approach I find quite promising and quite interesting to come up with better ideas for architecture is research-based design. So understanding that we don't design by drawing, we can design by conducting a lot of research, and finding out how we can use materials in a better way, how we can find better construction methods. This was actually at the very beginning of modern times, when architects went to the city of Rome to study building technologies to come up with new ideas. So Brunelleschi, for example, he didn't learn architecture the traditional way by going through the traditional learning process, but by doing research, by studying ancient buildings. Because buildings, when they fall apart, they tell us a lot about the way they are constructed. So it's almost like you see the whole method of putting together things. And that's what you could see in Rome perfectly with all the Roman ruins. An architect that became very famous by doing research-based design is Frei Otto in Germany. This is an exhibition a couple of years ago showing just all the models he used, not only to present his ideas, but also to develop his ideas. What he did was actually scientific experiments using models to define the shape and the form and the materials to be used for a building. So this is a big model he set up to study the shape and the structure and the forces that are at hand to build the cover for the Olympic Stadium in Munich. So that's the model. And then here he has a lot of very special photo cameras that help him to measure everything that's going on here. And here are the forces that are put into the model, so he can really define the shape. And that's what you see here is the building. Now, move on. That's a bit slow. Wait a second. Yeah. So that's the building that came out of that model. It still stands today. So, and it also shows you something of the power of research-based design. It's especially necessary if you want to be innovative in architecture. If you want to do like mainstream architecture, you don't need that much research. But if you want to do something innovative, you need a lot of research to find new ways to do things. And it can be done in a scientific way, but it also can be done in a more like cultural studies way. This is a Chinese former student of mine mapping the research undertaken by Wang Shu to develop his own approach to architecture. He's mapping his PhD dissertation in relation to the projects he produces and in relation to all the references he was studying to come up with his own approach to architecture. And actually he came up with an amazing approach. This is one of his buildings. It's a guest house on a university campus, combining sustainable mud construction, like rammed earth walls with traditional wood roofs and modern technology. So it's, if you ever have a chance to travel to China, this is a great place to be. So I think I'm running out of time now. Towards the last thing I want to quickly introduce is the notion of social design as a design approach. Because it's, if we want to come up with sustainable architecture, we need to be able to address the social sphere as well. And one of my brilliant colleagues, who did a lot of school buildings, design buildings, she actually developed a design tool she calls the school vision game. So she realized that to design with many people and with very different people with different backgrounds, with professionals and also non-professionals and even school children, you cannot use professional tools like drawings. You need to use something different. And she developed a game you can use to design a school. And so making the design process much more playful, much more enjoyable for the children. Even children can participate. People without any architectural education can participate by choosing different activities, by choosing different connections between activities, by and putting together an idea of a building, then is translated by professionals into a project. So very helpful tool for social design processes. Other architects in Europe, they start using a totally different design and building process because they don't do design in their studios anymore. They go directly on the construction site and start living there, discussing, start collecting materials and start making structures and buildings from that, creating a social body. In the same time, they create the building. So that's the last part of my book. I think I'm done for the moment. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your patience. And I hope you have many questions.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for Dr. Gänshirt. I think there is a lot knowledge for the audience. We've got one. Okay. I want to see. We've got sorry, 3 questions, and I will read one by one for the question.
Yes, please.
Yes. Okay. Wait a minute. Okay. From Raihan. For Mr. Gänshirt, nowadays there are a lot of design using glasses, especially skyscrapers, which is big problem the environment. So what is your perspective as a solution design for the future? Please.
Can you say again?
Okay.
I did not really understand it. I couldn't hear it well. Say again.
He asked you about the design nowadays. We have a lot of the using the glazes, especially for skyscraper or the high rise. I think that is the big problem for the environment. And what is the solution for the design in the future? That is the question.
Oh, that's a very big question.
Yes.
I'm certainly not in the position to answer such a difficult question. What is the solution for the design in the future? I don't know. I mean, my suggestion is that we carefully think about the tools we have and how we can develop better tools to come up with better designs. So we need we need definitely to develop better digital tools, for example, to understand the sustainability of projects. Yes, this takes a lot of data to be analyzed. We need to manage these data, and this is only possible in a digital way, for example.
Okay. It's enough, Doctor?
I think so.
Okay. The next question, I think from the Rachel, from your presentation, designing is not just draw a line with pencil, paper, and studio. Would you like to share how to use other methods like gesture by hand, such as clay or others, which is the prompt is unique, anti-mainstream, and we need to think about how this form can be able to build. Do you understand?
Yes.
Okay, maybe I can share the question for clearly question. You can stop default
Is it on
Zulam.
the chat? Can I see it on the chat?
Okay, I will share.
Oh, I see. I can see the chat now. This was
Okay.
Rachel, no?
Yeah, Rachel.
Let me try to explain this in a different way. When I was educated, my education had all emphasis on drawing as a design tool. So that's the understanding of my teachers was, it was not necessary to talk about design because it was just producing drawings. Then I started practicing as a young architect in Portugal with Álvaro Siza, and I saw he was using different tools. For example, he was using models in a very early stage of a design process, starting with small models, then making bigger models, and models in different scales at the same time, different materials, different colors, just to see what he was doing. And I saw how helpful that was to better develop his ideas. And in the same time, he was also using sketches. So none of my teachers ever mentioned sketching as a tool, or even was willing to discuss my sketches. They only wanted to see my drawings. So that's how I realized how important sketching can be in a tool. And when I started writing about this, many people came back to me and said, yes, it's absolutely true. For us, it's so important. And even in the last 10 years, it became even more important because it's such a good balance against the dominance of the computers and the programs. So sketching has again become quite an important tool. There's a beautiful book series I want to show you. It's on design processes by many architects. It's by Moleskine, and it's showing many architects how they sketch. So it's very interesting. But then I made more observations on that. And for example, an architect like Álvaro Siza, he was talking so much. So I discovered, a very important activity in his design is discussion and talking with people. And if you start analyzing this, you see how much it brings to the table. So it helps us to share ideas, it helps us to improve ideas. And many of the most important public projects in Berlin, for example, they are only successful because of the input, the public discussion brought to the project. So to give you an example, for many years, like an iconic building of the city was the so-called Gedächtniskirche. It's the ruin of a church combined with a new church. And it became iconic because it showed so much the effect of World War II on the city. But the architect didn't want to do it like this. The architect wanted to take away the ruin and just build a new church. But then there was a big public outcry and discussion that said, no, we want both. And when both was realized, the contrast between the old and new was so strong, so iconic, it became like a symbol of the city of the 1980s. So the discussion is not, sometimes obviously it's annoying to be discussed or to be questioned what you do, But if you follow the input, you can improve your design so much by using discussion as a design tool. And after having seen all this, I started to ask the question of design tools more systematically. So, and I came up with my original table of visual and verbal tools. And later on, with more research and also with more research done by others, I realized there are so many things you can do. So design is just a very broad term for many things you could do to improve your, or to develop your architectural ideas. So be aware of that and use it to come up with good ideas. Is that an answer?
Okay. The next question, I think the Rinaldi is
yeah.
Yep, have done, and I think I want to the next question from Mr. Eko Purwono. Could you please explain again the notion of scientific approach to design versus cultural approach?
If you do research-based design, the question is on what kind of research methods your design is based. So there are so many sciences relevant to architecture, starting from mathematics, geometry, computer science, but also sociology or history or theory, philosophy, material science, physics, chemistry. So many sciences are relevant to architecture or can be relevant for a specific project. And when you want to base a new idea you want to develop on research, the question is what kind of research will you go into? And one big area is natural sciences. So that's what I would call scientific research, using the scientific research methods, the methods of physics and chemistry or mathematics and so on. That's what I would call the scientific approach. And another approach is cultural sciences, like theory, philosophy, sociology, which offers another understanding of what we are doing, but it's also necessary for us to understand how our cultures are made, how they work, what we can do. So I see these as the two most important approaches to research-based design. And I was showing Otto as an example for the scientific approach, and I was showing Otto as an example for a cultural approach.
Okay, thank you. The next question, I think this is for your perspective, I think.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea for the develop the more architectural design ideas in the future? Do you have any perspective? The new tool, maybe?
Many tools need to be developed. One very important tool we need is to be more explicit on our way of evaluating architecture. So actually we need quite a complex set of criteria to evaluate a building, and many architects tend to only, for example, ask the question, is it functional or is it beautiful? But there are much more questions in place. And one of my colleagues is actually working on ways of mapping different criteria and how they are used and in a design process. So we need I hope we find some ways of being more transparent in the way we evaluate and make decisions in architecture. That's an important tool to develop. And other important tools are tools that allow us to easily see the sustainability of a project. So we do some drawings, but we cannot tell is it sustainable or not. We choose materials, but very often we don't know is this which one of these materials will be more sustainable, and sustainable in the building process, or more sustainable in the use of the building. So that's the whole question of sustainability is so new to architecture that it still lacks tools that are easily usable for, let's say, for a student. How do you know your project is sustainable, or how sustainable is it? Like 50%, 70%? How do you judge that?
Okay, thank you. We got the next question from Winardo. He want ask you about we have two methods. One is first is from the visual, and then second is from verbal. What do you think about the two methods? We can balance, or we have to choose one of them? What do you think?
I suggest that you use different tools to think differently about the same project. So you use visual tools, for example, to develop a shape and a form, and then you can use verbal tools to develop the meaning of this shape and to discuss the meaning and to criticize the meaning. So it's not the question is not to choose if you should use visual or verbal tools, but the question is rather how you can balance them and how you can combine them in the most intelligent way and in the most fruitful way for the design process. So I'm encouraging, I'm always encouraging my students to change tools very, very, very carefully. So not stick with one for a very long period, but combine different types of tools all the time. And it's because it helps us to make full use of our whole brain. Now, if we only use visual tools, we only use a part of our skills, but we should use all of our skills to master difficult design problems.
Okay, thank you. I think we have the limit time for the other question, but I want to read one question for the last from Aprizal Rangkuti. He want to ask you about your book, how to elaborate certain regulation such as dimension of rooms, circulation, and then etc. in designing and the ideal concept, so we can deliver both good design and good solution. What do you think about that?
I mean, what you definitely need to do is if you have your first design produced, you need to evaluate it, and you produce different variations of the same project, and then to find out which one is better than the other. So there is no ideal concept. It takes a lot of time and thinking and testing and improving. So a good solution is nothing that falls from the sky. What you can do, or what you should do at the beginning of a design process, is to see precedents, to see what are the best solutions at hand, and how can I improve them? Are they useful for my purpose or not? So many students struggle with this question of what is best practice in a certain project area at our times. So studying those can be a great starting point for any project. You don't start from scratch, you start from what you know as the best practice in an area.
Okay, that is the last question. We have the time limit in our webinar. Thank you for share, Dr. Gänshirt.
You're welcome.
I want to to make the resume, I wrote this. I have many point for your explain. I think we have two important point. Purpose is visual. Visual is I think is like as gesture, sketch, and drawing, and etc. And then we have verbal. I think in the practice of the architect, many of the professional architect is must have the ability for the two kind of the visual and verbal things. And you explain a lot about the process. It's thinking, perception, expression, and tools. And the last is tools. And you the two of the tools is visual and verbal. I think this is our resume in this session. And Dr. Gänshirt, thank you very much for your share. And I will take over to our host in this session. Okay, Rehan, you can.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for Mr. Gänshirt and Mr. David for presenting the materials. Wow, so many knowledge that we earned today. Now we are at the ending session for this event. Before closing, I would like to invite all participants to turn on the camera, and we'll take the picture as the documentation for today's event. The participant, please turn on the camera for the documentation for today. We're gonna take the picture. It's freely to pose, okay? I'm gonna count it. 3, 2, 1, and next. 3, 2, 1, and for the next slide. 3, 2, 1. The fourth slide. 3, 2, 1. The fifth slide. 3, 2, 1. The sixth. 3, 2, 1. And seventh slide. 3, 2, and 1. Okay. Once again, allow me to express our gratitude for holding this event. Thank you for all the participants, our special guest today, Mr. Dr. Christian Gänshirt. Also our special guest, moderator, also main speaker for today. I'm sorry if there is any mistaken. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon you guys.
Salam.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Doctor. We will.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, have a good day, Mr. Eko Purwono.